A man dies in Munich in 1920, and the entire discipline of sociology stops to mourn. Newspapers across Europe print obituaries calling him irreplaceable. His students weep openly at the funeral. Who commands this kind of reverence? Not a general, not a king. A professor who spent most of his life buried in archives, wrestling with questions that had no clear answers. Max Weber changed how we understand power, religion, capitalism, and the modern world itself. But here's what almost no one knows. For 7 years in the middle of his career, he couldn't work at all. A complete mental collapse left him unable to read, unable to write, barely able to function. The man who had produced some of the most rigorous scholarship in history spent years staring at walls, travelling aimlessly, trying to remember what it felt like to think. How does someone recover from that, and then write the works that define an entire field? That's the story we're tracing tonight. We begin where Weber began, in a household that was both privileged and suffocating. April 21st, 1864. Erfurt, Prussia. A boy is born into a family that expects greatness but offers little warmth. His father, Max Weber Sr., is a lawyer and politician, a man who has clawed his way into the upper ranks of German society. He's prosperous, well-connected, and utterly domineering. What he says in his household is law, and he enforces that law with the casual cruelty of someone who believes authority justifies itself. His mother, Helene Fallenstein Weber, is something else entirely. Deeply religious, intellectually curious, morally serious in a way that borders on anguish. She reads theology, debates ethics, and struggles constantly with the gap between the Christian ideals she believes in and the comfortable bourgeois life she actually lives. In another era, she might have been a scholar herself. Instead, she pours her intellect into her children. Young Max is the eldest son, and from the beginning, he's caught between these two forces. His father wants him tough, practical, successful, in the ways that matter to Prussian society. His mother wants him good, thoughtful, aware of the moral weight of every decision. It's not a tension that can be resolved, it can only be endured. The household is materially comfortable. There are servants, fine furniture, books lining the walls, but emotional comfort, that's scarce. Max Sr. doesn't discuss, he pronounces. Helene doesn't argue directly. She withdraws into pained silence. The children learn early that safety lies in intellectual achievement, in being impressive enough that their father's approval might occasionally be won. Max, the younger, throws himself into that game. By age 4, he's reading. By age 8, he's devouring history books meant for adults. He writes essays on ancient Rome, on the Holy Roman Empire, on the structure of feudal society. His parents discover these papers lying around the house, dense analyses written in a child's handwriting. But he's not a prodigy in the sense of being effortlessly brilliant. He's a grinder. He reads compulsively because reading is safe, because books don't judge or demand or withdraw affection based on your performance. The intellectual life becomes his refuge. At 13, he enters the gymnasium, the elite secondary school that prepares boys for university. He excels immediately, not just in classics and history, but in everything. Languages, mathematics, philosophy. His teachers recognize that they're dealing with someone unusual, not just intelligent, but relentless. A mind that won't let go of a problem until it's been solved to his satisfaction. His classmates find him strange. He's not interested in the social hierarchies of adolescence, the games of status and belonging that consume most teenagers. He's polite but distant, friendly but fundamentally elsewhere. His real life is happening in his head, in the conversations he's having with Cicero and Machiavelli and whoever else he's reading that week. At home, the tension between his parents deepens. Max Sr. grows more authoritarian with age, more certain that his way is the only way. Helene's religious convictions intensify, sharpening into a kind of moral perfectionism that makes everyday compromises feel like betrayals. Young Max watches this, absorbs it, says nothing. In 1882, at 18, he enters the University of Heidelberg to study law. It's the expected path for someone of his background. His father was a lawyer. His father's connections are in legal and political circles, and law offers a clear route to the kind of respectability that matters in Wilhelmina Germany. But Weber doesn't approach law the way most students do. He's not content to memorize statutes and precedents. He wants to understand the underlying logic, the historical development, the social forces that shape legal systems. A lecture on Roman law becomes an excuse to read everything written about Roman property relations. A seminar on commercial law sends him into the archives to trace how merchant practices evolved across centuries. His professors notice, this isn't normal student diligence, this is something close to obsession. After 3 semesters at Heidelberg, Weber transfers to the University of Strasbourg for military service. It's required a year in uniform that most young men simply endure. Weber endures it too, but he also uses the time. Stationed in Strasbourg, he attends lectures, reads, writes letters to professors, back in Heidelberg, debating points of legal theory. Even in a barracks, he's working. Then he returns to Berlin, to the university there, and to his parents' house. He's 21 now, and the choice to live at home is strategic. Berlin offers better resources, better professors, better access to the archives and libraries he needs. But it also means returning to the atmosphere that shaped him, that careful dance around his father's authority and his mother's silent suffering. He throws himself into work with even greater intensity. Law, economics, history, philosophy. He's not just studying these fields separately. He's trying to understand how they connect, how legal structures emerge from economic conditions, how ideas shape institutions, and institutions shape ideas. It's the beginning of what will become his life's project. In 1886, he passes his first legal examination with distinction. No one is surprised, but instead of immediately entering practice, he decides to pursue a doctorate. The topic he chooses reveals where his mind is going, a study of medieval trading companies and their legal structures. It's technical, dense, the kind of subject that makes most people's eyes glaze over. Weber attacks it like he's been personally insulted by every unsolved question in the field. He reads sources in Latin, Italian, French, Spanish. He traces the evolution of commercial law across centuries, showing how economic pressures forced legal innovations, how the needs of merchants gradually reshaped the institutions that governed them. The dissertation runs to hundreds of pages of meticulous scholarship. He completes it in 1889. He's 25 years old and already producing work that established scholars struggle to match. But here's what's happening beneath the surface. The intensity is starting to crack him. He's sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night, working the rest. His health begins to show strain. Headaches, digestive problems, a general exhaustion that no amount of rest seems to touch. Friends suggest he slow down. He ignores them. In 1891, he submits his Habilitationsschrift, the second dissertation required to become a university professor in Germany. The topic is even more forbidding than his doctorate, the agrarian history of ancient Rome. He examines how land ownership patterns, labour systems, and agricultural practices shaped Roman society and eventually contributed to its collapse. It's brilliant, exhaustive, and nearly unreadable in its density. Weber doesn't write for a general audience. He writes for the handful of people capable of following his arguments through thickets of evidence and qualification. The work is accepted. At 27, Max Weber is qualified to teach at a German university, one of the youngest scholars to reach this level. The path to an academic career is open, but something else is also open now, a crack in the foundation that will soon become a chasm. During these years, Weber meets a woman who will change his life in ways neither of them can predict. Her name is Marianne Schnittke, a distant cousin. She's intelligent, educated by the standards available to women at the time, and deeply committed to the emerging women's movement in Germany. They begin corresponding, then meeting when family gatherings allow. Weber is drawn to her mind. She's one of the few people who can actually discuss his work, who asks genuine questions rather than just nodding along. For Marianne, Weber represents something rare, a man who takes women's intellectual lives seriously, who doesn't dismiss her ideas simply because of her gender. They marry in 1893. Weber is 29, Marianne 23. It should be the beginning of a partnership. In many ways, it is. But it's also the beginning of something stranger and more troubled than either of them anticipates. The marriage is never consummated. This fact will remain private during their lifetimes, revealed only decades later through Marianne's papers. Why? The historical record offers no clear answer. Some biographers suggest Weber's puritanical upbringing created psychological barriers he couldn't overcome. Others point to his deteriorating mental health. Still others suggest the marriage was more intellectual partnership than romantic union from the start. What's certain is that both Max and Marianne remain committed to each other for the rest of his life. They live together, work together, support each other's projects. But the relationship exists in a space that defies conventional categories. While his personal life settles into this unusual arrangement, Weber's professional life accelerates. In 1893, he's appointed Associate Professor of Commercial Law at the University of Berlin. It's a significant position, but not quite the full professorship he's aiming for. Then in 1894, an opportunity arrives. The University of Freiburg offers him a full chair in economics. It's not his primary field, law is, but Weber has never respected disciplinary boundaries anyway. He accepts. The move to Freiburg should be liberating. Away from Berlin, away from his father's house, finally independent. But Weber brings his work habits with him. The 4-hour nights, the compulsive reading, the inability to leave a question unresolved. He teaches his courses, writes articles, takes on administrative duties, and somehow finds time to begin a massive study of agricultural labour in Eastern Germany. The study is vintage Weber, empirical, detailed, searching for the social and economic forces shaping worker behaviour. He doesn't just collect statistics, he tries to understand the lived experience behind them. Why do workers make the choices they make? How do cultural traditions interact with economic pressures? What does it mean that German agriculture is increasingly dependent on Polish migrant labour? These aren't just academic questions, they're politically charged in an era of rising nationalism. Weber's conclusions that German landowners' pursuit of profit is undermining German cultural dominance in the East enrage conservatives. He doesn't care. The evidence leads where it leads. In 1896 he moves again, this time to the University of Heidelberg, another full professorship, this time in economics at one of Germany's most prestigious universities. At 32 he's arrived. Everything he's worked towards since childhood is his, and that's when his father dies and everything collapses. The death comes suddenly, unexpectedly, after a bitter argument. Max Sr. visits Heidelberg in summer 1897. The old conflicts surface immediately. The father's authoritarianism, the son's barely contained resentment, decades of tension compressed into a few days. They fight badly. Max tells his father things that have been building for years. The old man leaves angry. Weeks later, Max Sr. dies. There's no reconciliation, no final peace, just the fight, and then death, and then the weight of everything unsaid, and everything said too harshly. Max Weber collapses, not immediately, not at the funeral. The breakdown comes slowly, methodically, like everything else in his life. First the insomnia worsens, then the anxiety attacks begin. He stands in front of his lecture hall and finds he cannot speak. The words that once flowed so easily now catch in his throat. His hands shake. His vision blurs. He tries to push through. This is what Webers do. You work, you endure, you master yourself through sheer force of will, but the body has its own logic. By early 1898, he can barely function. He resigns from teaching duties, though he keeps his position at Heidelberg. Temporary, he tells himself. A brief rest, then back to work. The rest lasts 7 years. What modern medicine would likely diagnose as severe depression, combined with anxiety disorder, Weber experiences as total psychic collapse. He cannot read for more than a few minutes without overwhelming fatigue. He cannot write. He cannot think clearly. The mind that had been his greatest asset, his escape from his father's house, his path to independence, simply stops working. Marianne becomes his caretaker. She manages the household, shields him from demands, handles correspondence. The woman who married an intellectual partnership finds herself nursing a broken man. Some biographers paint her as saint, others as controlling. The truth is probably simpler. She does what needs doing. Weber tries various cures, each fashionable in its time, each equally useless. He travels to Italy. The change of scenery does nothing. He visits sanatoriums in Switzerland and Austria. The rest cure, the water cure, the mountain air, nothing works. He spends months in near Catatonia, staring at walls, unable to engage with the world that once fascinated him. His colleagues are sympathetic at first, then puzzled, then quietly dismissive. Mental illness carries enormous stigma in Wilhelmina, Germany. Real men don't break down. Real scholars don't lose their nerve. Weber's absence from academic life stretches from months into years. His position at Heidelberg remains technically his, but everyone knows he's not coming back. Not really. The few visitors allowed to see him report a ghost. The vitality, the intensity, the fierce intelligence, all seemingly gone. What remains is a hollow man who occasionally manages a few minutes of conversation before exhaustion overwhelms him again. But something is happening beneath the surface. Weber isn't just broken. He's being forced to confront everything he'd avoided through work. The relationship with his father, his own driven nature, the cost of his ambitions, the structure of his marriage. Questions he'd buried under productivity now demand answers he can't provide. Think of what this means. Here's a man who built his entire identity on intellectual mastery, the son who escaped the father through superior knowledge, the scholar who could outlast, outwork, outthink anyone. And now that's gone. The tool he used to build himself has shattered. Years pass. 1900 arrives. The new century that will be defined by mass politics, industrial warfare, and the collapse of old certainties. Weber experiences it from sickbeds and sanatoriums, watching time move while he stands still. Then gradually, recovery begins. Not dramatic, not sudden, just small improvements. He can read again, a little. He can write briefly. The anxiety recedes enough that he can take short walks, receive limited visitors, engage with ideas in measured doses. By 1903, he's attempting scholarship again. Not teaching, that's still impossible, but writing. He starts with reviews of other people's work. Short pieces, nothing too demanding. The academic community watches skeptically. Is this real recovery, or just another false start? And then something strange happens. Weber doesn't return to his old research. He doesn't pick up where he left off. Instead, he becomes obsessed with a question that seems to come from nowhere. Why did capitalism develop in the West and not elsewhere? What made Europe different? It's not a new question. Economists and historians have debated it for decades, but Weber approaches it from an angle no one expects. He starts reading about Protestant theology. He dives into religious history. He examines Calvinist doctrine with the same intensity he once brought to agricultural statistics. His colleagues are baffled. Weber's a sociologist, an economist, a legal scholar. What's he doing in theology? But Weber sees something others miss: a connection between religious belief and economic behaviour, between the Protestant emphasis on worldly success as a sign of divine favour and the accumulation of capital that defines modern capitalism. He writes furiously now, the breakdown that lasted 7 years gives way to explosive productivity. Between 1904 and 1905, he produces one of the most influential essays in social science history, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. The argument is elegant and controversial. Weber traces how Calvinist theology, particularly the doctrine of predestination, created profound psychological anxiety among believers. If your eternal fate is already determined, how do you know whether you're saved or damned? The answer, according to Protestant preachers, was to look for signs of God's favour in your worldly success. Work hard, accumulate wealth. But don't enjoy it, that would be sinful. Instead, reinvest, build, expand. This creates, Weber argues, a unique mentality, the Protestant work ethic, a compulsion to labour not for pleasure or consumption, but as proof of salvation. And this mentality, he suggests, provided the cultural foundation for modern capitalism. Not the cause, he's careful to emphasise, one cause among many, but a crucial one that other explanations miss. The essay ignites debate immediately. Some scholars embrace it as breakthrough insight. Others attack it as oversimplified, historically inaccurate, or theologically naive. The Catholic Church is predictably offended. Protestant scholars split. Everyone has an opinion. But here's what's remarkable. The man who wrote this is the same man who spent 7 years unable to read. The breakdown didn't destroy Weber's intellect. It transformed it. The pre-collapse Weber was brilliant but conventional, working within established frameworks. The post-collapse Weber sees connections others miss, asks questions that seem to come from outside normal academic discourse. What happened during those lost years? We can only speculate. But it's as if the destruction of his old self cleared space for something new. The driven, compulsive scholar became someone more reflective, more willing to explore uncomfortable territories. The man who'd avoided his own inner life was forced to confront it, and emerged with different eyes. The Protestant ethic makes Weber famous beyond Germany. It gets translated, debated, taught in universities across Europe and America. But Weber himself remains fragile. He still can't teach. The anxiety returns unpredictably. He has good weeks and bad months. The recovery is real but incomplete. In 1904, he attends an academic conference in St. Louis. It's his first trip to America, and it overwhelms him. The scale of American cities, the raw energy of American capitalism, the democracy that seems both inspiring and terrifying. He travels across the country, observing, taking notes, trying to understand this society that embodies everything his Protestant ethic describes. He meets American academics, attends lectures, visits factories and churches. What strikes him most is the absence of European class rigidity. In Germany, your birth determines your fate. In America, at least in theory, anyone can rise. It's not actually true. Weber's too observant to miss the racism, the exploitation, the new forms of hierarchy. But the ideology is different. The dream of mobility matters even when the reality falls short. He returns to Germany energized but exhausted. The trip was too much. He collapses again, not as severely as before, but enough to derail momentum. The pattern will repeat throughout the rest of his life. Periods of intense productivity followed by breakdown. Recovery followed by relapse. He learns to work within these rhythms, to produce during the good periods and accept the bad ones. By 1909, Weber finally resigns his professorship at Heidelberg. 15 years after accepting it, 12 years after he stopped teaching. The official acknowledgement of what everyone already knew. His academic career, in the traditional sense, is over. He'll never teach regularly again. But he's not finished, far from it. He continues writing, researching, thinking. Without teaching obligations, he's free to pursue whatever interests him. And what interests him is everything: religion, economics, politics, law, music, ancient civilizations, modern bureaucracy. He reads Sanskrit to study Indian philosophy. He learns enough about music theory to write about rationalization in Western musical notation. His home in Heidelberg becomes a salon. Intellectuals from across Europe visit to argue, debate, exchange ideas. The young Georg Lukács, future Marxist philosopher, Ernst Bloch, utopian thinker, Robert Michels, political sociologist, they gather in Weber's study, drinking wine, smoking cigars, talking until dawn about ideas that will shape the 20th century. Marianne presides over these gatherings. She's become a feminist activist, writing books about women's rights and marriage law. The unconventional arrangement of their marriage allows both of them freedom to work, to think, to engage with the world on their own terms. They're partners in a way that defies easy categorization, not lovers in the conventional sense, but deeply connected intellectually and emotionally. Weber also becomes politically active again. Germany is changing rapidly in the early 1900s. The empire is militarizing. The Kaiser is pursuing aggressive foreign policy. Weber watches with alarm as the structures of Wilhelmina Germany grow more rigid, more authoritarian, more disconnected from democratic accountability. He writes newspaper articles warning about the dangers of bureaucratic ossification. He joins the Progressive People's Party, advocating for parliamentary reform. He argues that Germany needs stronger democratic institutions, that the Kaiser's personal rule is unstable and dangerous. These aren't popular positions among German elites. Weber doesn't care. Then August 1914 arrives. The war that will destroy everything begins. Weber is 50 years old, too old for military service, but he's desperate to contribute. He helps organize military hospitals. He serves on government committees. He travels to Brussels to advise on occupation policy. What he sees horrifies him. The German military is committing atrocities in Belgium. The occupation is brutal, counterproductive, turning potential allies into enemies. Weber writes reports arguing for restraint, for smarter policy. He's ignored. The military doesn't want advice from intellectuals. They want victory through force. As the war drags on, Weber's initial patriotism curdles into disgust. Not at Germany's cause, he never becomes a pacifist, but at the incompetence, the cruelty, the stupidity of how the war is being conducted. He watches his country stumble toward disaster and can do nothing to stop it. By 1917, with America entering the war and Russia collapsing into revolution, Weber knows Germany has lost. The question now is what comes after. Can Germany build a stable democracy from the ruins of empire? Or will it descend into chaos? He begins writing again, furiously, not about Protestant ethics or Indian philosophy, about power, about legitimacy, about how political authority actually works. The questions that will consume his final years are taking shape. What makes people obey? Why do they accept some rulers and reject others? How do charisma, tradition, and legal rational authority interact? These aren't abstract academic questions anymore. They're urgent, practical problems for a civilization tearing itself apart. Weber is trying to understand not just what is happening, but what might come next. And what he sees terrifies him more than anything in his life so far. November 1918. The war ends. Germany has lost. The Kaiser abdicates and flees to Holland. The empire collapses in a matter of days. What replaces it is chaos. Workers' councils seize power in major cities. Communist revolutionaries try to replicate the Bolshevik takeover they've just witnessed in Russia. The far right organizes paramilitary groups. Street fighting breaks out. Political assassinations become routine. Weber watches his country come apart and decides he needs to act. He joins the German Democratic Party, a liberal group trying to chart a middle course between communist revolution and right-wing reaction. He advises the new government on constitutional questions. He travels to Versailles as part of the German delegation negotiating the peace treaty. What he encounters there crushes him. The Treaty of Versailles is punitive, designed not just to end the war, but to humiliate Germany. The territorial losses, the reparations payments, the war guilt clause forcing Germany to accept, say, all responsibility for the conflict. Weber sees immediately that this treaty will poison European politics for decades. He argues against signing, but Germany has no choice. The alternative is military invasion. The treaty is signed. Weber returns home furious and exhausted. The new German Republic, what will become known as the Weimar Republic, is born in the worst possible circumstances. Democracy is associated in many Germans' minds with military defeat and national humiliation. The left sees the new government as a betrayal of revolutionary ideals. The right sees it as illegitimate, a government imposed by foreign enemies. Weber tries to defend the Republic in speeches and articles. He argues that democracy offers the only path forward, that Germany needs rational legal authority if it's to avoid dictatorship. But he's swimming against a powerful current. Meanwhile, he's writing. The breakdown he's living through is focusing his thinking in ways that years of academic stability never could. He's working on what will become Economy and Society, a massive, unfinished treatise on how social and political order actually function. The book is a labyrinth. Weber never completed it and never organized it into final form. Scholars still argue about how to read it, what belongs where, what he meant to emphasize. But buried in its hundreds of pages are insights that will reshape social science. His famous typology of authority, traditional authority based on custom and inherited status, charismatic authority based on the extraordinary qualities of an individual leader, legal rational authority based on impersonal rules and procedures. Every stable political order, Weber argues, combines these types, but the modern world is moving inexorably toward legal rational domination, toward bureaucracy, toward the iron cage. He also develops his theory of the state, the definition that will become canonical. The state is that human community which successfully claims the monopoly of legitimate physical force within a given territory. Not any use of force, legitimate force. The key word is legitimate. Gangs use force, warlords use force, but only the state can make most people believe that its violence is rightful, proper, deserved. This legitimacy is what separates government from organised crime, and legitimacy is always precarious. It must be constantly reproduced through symbols, rituals, stories that convince people to obey. When legitimacy fails, when people stop believing in the system's right to command them, even the most powerful state can collapse overnight. Weber has just watched it happen to the German Empire. He knows it can happen again. In Munich, where he's taken a temporary professorship, the political situation is especially volatile. A short-lived communist government, the Bavarian Soviet Republic, had briefly seized power in April 1919. It was crushed by right-wing paramilitary forces in a wave of brutal violence. The city is traumatized, polarized, dangerous. Weber lectures on socialism, trying to explain to students what's happening and why. He's not sympathetic to the communists. He thinks their economic theories are naive and their methods will lead to dictatorship. But he's equally hostile to the far right, which is gaining strength by playing on fears of communist revolution. He sees clearly what many Germans refuse to acknowledge. The real threat isn't communism, which has no mass base in Germany. The real threat is right-wing authoritarianism wrapped in nationalist rhetoric. In January 1920, Weber gives what will become one of his most famous lectures, Politics as a Vocation. The room is packed with students desperate for guidance in a world that seems to have lost all moorings. Weber speaks for 2 hours without notes. He talks about what politics actually is. Not what people wish it were. Not the idealized version taught in civics classes. But the real thing. The struggle for power. Politics means striving to share power or to influence the distribution of power, either among states or among groups within a state. That's it. That's what politics is. Everything else is decoration. He distinguishes between two fundamentally different ethical orientations: the ethic of ultimate ends and the ethic of responsibility. The person committed to ultimate ends asks only whether an action serves their ideals. The pacifist who refuses to fight even if it means his country's conquest. The revolutionary who accepts any amount of violence if it advances the cause. The religious zealot who follows divine commands regardless of consequences. These people judge actions by their alignment with absolute principles. The person committed to the ethic of responsibility asks different questions. What will actually happen if I do this? What are the likely consequences? Can I live with those consequences? This person accepts that good intentions aren't enough. That moral action requires thinking through outcomes. Weber isn't saying one ethic is right and the other wrong. He's saying they're incompatible. And anyone serious about politics must primarily embrace the ethic of responsibility, because politics is about consequences, about what actually happens to real people in the real world. The student who wants to enter politics while keeping his hands clean is a fool. Politics is made with the head, not with other parts of the body or soul. And yet, there's a paradox at the heart of political life. The person who practices the ethic of responsibility, who calculates consequences and makes hard compromises, can become cynical, can lose sight of what they're fighting for. The person who maintains passionate commitment to ultimate ends, who refuses to compromise their ideals, can accomplish nothing. The mature politician needs both, passion and perspective, conviction and calculation, the ability to believe deeply in something while still thinking clearly about how to achieve it. This is rare. Most people are pulled entirely to one side or the other. They become either cold calculators or ineffective idealists. The great political leader combines them. And here Weber introduces the concept that will haunt 20th century politics: charisma. The term comes from theology. It means gift of grace. Weber strips away the religious meaning and makes it sociological. Charismatic authority is domination based on the exceptional qualities of an individual. The leader who seems to possess supernatural powers, heroic qualities, extraordinary vision. People follow charismatic leaders not because of tradition or law, but because they believe in the leader's special nature. Charismatic authority is inherently unstable. It depends on success. The charismatic leader must deliver miracles, victories, transformative change. When the miracles stop, the authority evaporates. Weber sees charismatic leadership emerging in moments of crisis, when traditional authority has failed and legal rational authority hasn't yet solidified, when people are desperate for someone to save them. Germany in 1920 is exactly such a moment, and Weber knows what's coming. He can see the space opening for a charismatic demagogue, someone who will promise to restore Germany's greatness, someone who will blame scapegoats for the nation's humiliation, someone who will reject democratic process in favour of personal will. He doesn't know the name yet. Adolf Hitler is still an obscure agitator, but Weber understands the type. He's describing the political logic that will make Hitler possible. The lecture ends. Students applaud, some are inspired, others are disturbed. Weber has told them that politics requires getting your hands dirty, that good intentions lead to hell as often as evil ones, that democracy is fragile and charismatic leadership is dangerous. These aren't comforting messages. A few months later, Weber moves to Munich permanently. He's accepted a chair at the university. He's writing constantly now, working on the revisions to his Protestant ethic thesis, developing his comparative studies of religion, mapping out what will become the theory of rationalization that ties his entire life's work together. The Rationalization thesis is Weber's grand narrative of Western history, his answer to Marx's materialism and Hegel's idealism. The story goes like this. The West has undergone a unique process over the past several centuries, a process of increasing rationalization, of bringing more and more areas of life under systematic, calculable, rule-governed control. This process appears in multiple spheres simultaneously. In religion, the move from magic and ritual to ethical monotheism, from trying to manipulate divine forces to following rational moral codes. In law, the development of systematic legal codes based on abstract principles rather than case-by-case tradition. In administration, the rise of bureaucracy with its impersonal rules and hierarchical organization. In economic life, the emergence of capitalism with its methodical pursuit of profit through rational calculation. In science, the systematic investigation of nature through controlled experiment and mathematical analysis. In music, the development of harmonic theory and standardized notation. Each sphere follows its own logic, but they're connected. They're all expressions of the same underlying drive toward rationality, toward making the world calculable, predictable, controlled. This process has produced enormous benefits: modern science, industrial productivity, legal predictability, administrative efficiency. But it's also created the iron cage. As rationalization advances, life becomes more organized, but also more constrained. More efficient, but less meaningful. The bureaucrat following procedures. The worker reduced to a function in a machine. The scientist who knows everything about his specialized field, but nothing about what it all means. Weber sees rationalization as both liberation and imprisonment. It frees us from the arbitrary authority of tradition and the chaos of magic. But it traps us in systems of control that nobody fully understands or can escape, and there's no going back. You can't unrationalize society. The knowledge has been gained. The systems have been built. The old enchantments are broken forever. The only question is whether we can live with the consequences, whether we can find meaning in a disenchanted world. Weber is racing to finish his work. He knows his health is fragile. The breakdown years ago damaged something that never fully healed. He pushes himself anyway, working late into the night, smoking constantly, drinking coffee and wine to keep going. His lectures are packed. Students sense they're witnessing something important. Weber speaks with an intensity that's almost frightening. His eyes burn, his voice rises. He's not just teaching, he's warning. Marianne worries about him. She can see the toll this work is taking, but she knows better than to try to stop him. He's finally doing what he was meant to do, finally bringing together all the threads of his life's research into a comprehensive vision. The war destroyed his faith in progress. The revolution and its aftermath destroyed his faith in reason's automatic triumph. What remains is the clear-eyed analysis of how power actually works, how legitimacy is created and destroyed, how rationalization advances and why it can't be stopped. June 1920. Weber catches a cold. He ignores it, keeps working. The cold develops into pneumonia. Antibiotics don't exist yet. There's nothing to be done but wait and hope. He dies on June 14th, 1920. He's 56 years old. The work is unfinished. Economy and society exists only as fragments and drafts. The comparative religion studies are incomplete. The grand synthesis he was building remains in pieces. Marianne will spend years organizing his papers, preparing manuscripts for publication, defending his legacy. The world he tried to understand and warn about is about to get much worse. The Weimar Republic that emerged from Germany's defeat was democracy built on quicksand. Hyperinflation would soon destroy the middle class. Political violence would become routine. And within 13 years, the rational legal authority Weber analysed would produce something he never anticipated: a system where legality itself became the instrument of absolute horror. But Weber's ideas survived him, his students scattered across Europe and America, carrying his concepts with them. The distinction between authority types, the theory of bureaucracy, the Protestant ethic thesis, the analysis of rationalization. These became foundational concepts in the new discipline of sociology. One student in particular would take Weber's insights in an unexpected direction. Karl Mannheim studied under Weber in Heidelberg. He absorbed the method, the comparative approach, the focus on legitimacy and power. But he added something Weber had resisted: a systematic sociology of knowledge itself. Mannheim's question was simple but radical. If economic position shapes consciousness, as Marx argued, if religious belief shapes economic behaviour, as Weber showed, then what shapes the ideas of intellectuals themselves? Are there social determinants of thought that operate even on those who claim to be objective? The answer became Ideology and Utopia, published in 1929. Mannheim argued that all thinking is socially situated. There's no view from nowhere. Every perspective emerges from a particular social location and serves particular interests, often unconsciously. Conservatives think differently than revolutionaries, not just because they've reached different conclusions, but because they inhabit different social worlds. The landowner defending tradition and the factory worker demanding change aren't just disagreeing. They're seeing different realities shaped by their positions in the social structure. This was dangerous territory. If all thought is ideological, then what about Mannheim's own theory? Isn't it also shaped by his position? He tried to create an exception for intellectuals who he claimed could achieve relative objectivity by being aware of their biases. But the trap remained. The sociology of knowledge seemed to undermine its own foundations. Meanwhile, Weber's analysis of rationalization was being extended in darker directions. The Frankfurt School, a group of Marxist theorists centered in Germany, took Weber's iron cage concept and fused it with Marx's critique of capitalism. The result was the theory of instrumental reason. Max Horkheimer and Theodor Adorno argued that rationalization hadn't just created bureaucracy and calculation, it had transformed reason itself from a tool of liberation into a tool of domination. Enlightenment rationality, which promised to free humanity from myth and superstition, had become its own form of mythology, a mythology of control. Science doesn't just study nature, it subjugates nature. Technology doesn't just solve problems, it creates new forms of power over human beings. The factory doesn't just organize production, it disciplines bodies and minds. The culture industry doesn't just entertain, it manufactures consent. They wrote this in California, in exile from Hitler. The most rational society in European history had produced the most irrational outcome. The bureaucratic state, the technological prowess, the systematic organization. All of it mobilized for genocide. Weber's prediction about the iron cage had come true in ways nobody imagined. But there was another heir to Weber's legacy, working in a very different direction. Talcott Parsons was an American sociologist who discovered Weber's work in the 1920s while studying in Germany. He translated the Protestant ethic into English, introducing Weber to the Anglophone world. Parsons saw in Weber's work the foundation for a grand theory of social systems. He stripped away the pessimism, the cultural specificity, the historical contingency. What remained was an abstract model of how societies maintain order through shared values and complementary roles. In Parsons' hands, Weber's analysis of legitimacy became functionalism. Social institutions exist because they fulfill necessary functions. Religion provides meaning. Family socializes children. Economy allocates resources. Each institution contributes to the stability of the whole. This was Weber domesticated. Weber made safe for American academia. The iron cage became the social system. Rationalization became modernization. The disenchantment of the world became secularization. All the anxiety, all the tragedy drained away. What remained was a theory that explained how things worked without asking whether they should work differently. By the 1950s, Parsonian functionalism dominated American sociology. Weber was taught in every university, but it was a particular Weber, the theorist of modernization and bureaucracy. Not the prophet of disenchantment, not the analyst of charismatic disruption, not the pessimist who saw rationalization as a trap. Then came the 60s, and suddenly Weber's darker insights became relevant again. Students reading Politics as a Vocation discovered the lecture on power and responsibility. Activists reading the essays on bureaucracy found tools to critique the very institutions Parsons celebrated. The iron cage became a rallying cry against conformity and alienation. C. Wright Mills, a maverick American sociologist, revived Weber's analysis of power elites. He showed how corporate executives, military leaders, and political officials formed an interconnected ruling class. Not through conspiracy, but through shared interests and worldviews. Weber's concept of the status group explained it perfectly. In Europe, Raymond Aron used Weber to challenge both Marxism and American optimism. Aron argued that industrial society, whether capitalist or communist, faced the same problems of rationalization and bureaucracy that Weber identified. The Soviet Union hadn't escaped the iron cage, it had built an even stronger one. Meanwhile, Weber's methodology was being tested in new contexts. Clifford Geertz, an anthropologist, took the interpretive approach Weber pioneered and applied it to Indonesian and Moroccan societies. Geertz argued that culture must be read like a text. That understanding meaning requires deep immersion in local contexts. That comparison is possible only after you've grasped each culture on its own terms. This was pure Weber, the same method that led to the Protestant ethic and the comparative religion studies. But Geertz pushed it further, arguing that cultures aren't systems to be explained, but webs of significance to be interpreted. There's no grand theory waiting to be discovered, only thick description of particular meanings in particular places. The question of capitalism's origins remained contested. Was Weber right that ideas shaped economic development? Or was Marx correct that material conditions determined consciousness? The debate never resolved because both were partly right. Economic historian David Landes showed that Protestant regions did develop faster than Catholic ones in early modern Europe. But he also showed that institutions mattered. Property rights, legal systems, educational access. You couldn't reduce it to either ideas or material conditions. The causation ran both ways. China became the crucial test case. Weber had argued that Confucianism blocked capitalism because it emphasized harmony over competition, relationships over contracts, tradition over innovation. But in the late 20th century, Confucian societies in East Asia became economic powerhouses. Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, and eventually China itself. Did this disprove Weber? Not exactly. It showed that the same cultural tradition could support different economic systems depending on how it was interpreted and applied. Confucian emphasis on education and discipline turned out to be highly compatible with industrial capitalism. Weber was wrong about the content but right about the method. Culture matters, but which aspects matter and how they matter depends on historical context. The rationalization thesis proved more durable. Every society that industrialized faced the same trajectory Weber described: the decline of traditional authority, the the rise of bureaucratic organization, the increasing specialization and calculation, the disenchantment of the world. But rationalization took different forms in different places. Japanese bureaucracy developed its own character, blending formal hierarchy with informal networks. Soviet rationalization produced a system obsessed with planning but unable to adapt. American rationalization created corporations that were simultaneously efficient and chaotic. Weber's framework explained the pattern, but the variations showed that culture and history shaped how rationalization unfolded. There was no single path to modernity, no inevitable destination, just the general process of making the world more calculable and less magical. The concept of charismatic authority became especially important for understanding 20th century politics. Hitler was the obvious example Weber never lived to see. A leader with no traditional legitimacy, no rational legal basis, who commanded loyalty through pure personal magnetism and the promise of national redemption. But charismatic authority wasn't limited to fascism. Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Mao Castro, each built movements on personal authority that transcended both tradition and legality. Each promised a fundamental break with the existing order. Each eventually faced the problem Weber identified: how to routinize charisma before it burns out or the leader dies. Some movements succeeded in institutionalizing their revolutionary energy. The civil rights movement built organizations that outlasted King. Others failed. Mao's cultural revolution devoured the party he built. Castro's Cuba remained dependent on his personal authority for decades, leaving the system fragile after his death. The pattern Weber described kept repeating: charismatic breakthrough, organizational consolidation, bureaucratic routinization. The revolutionary moment becomes the new establishment. The new establishment faces its own challenges. The cycle continues. Modern corporations discovered Weber through management theory. His analysis of bureaucracy became the foundation for organizational studies. Max Weber, the pessimist who warned about the iron cage, became the patron saint of business schools, teaching efficient administration. This created a strange irony. Weber's critique of rationalization was used to make rationalization more effective. His analysis of how bureaucracy works became a manual for building better bureaucracies. The iron cage was studied so it could be strengthened. Some theorists tried to recover Weber's critical edge. Reinhard Bendix showed that bureaucracy was never as rational as Weber's ideal type suggested. Organizations were full of politics, informal networks, and irrational behaviors. The rational legal facade masked power struggles and personal ambitions. Michel Crozier studied French bureaucracies and found that they were inefficient precisely because they were too rational. Every contingency anticipated, every decision governed by rules. The result was paralysis. Nobody could adapt to unexpected situations because adaptation required breaking rules. This pointed to a fundamental tension in Weber's work. He described bureaucracy as technically superior to other forms of organization, but he also warned that it created an iron cage. Both things were true. Bureaucracy was more efficient, and that efficiency came at the cost of human freedom and meaning. By the late 20th century, Weber's concepts had become part of the basic vocabulary of social science: authority, legitimacy, rationalization, disenchantment, ideal types, value-free research, Verstehen. Every sociology student learned these terms. Most never read the original texts. The ideas were filtered through textbooks and secondary sources, simplified, sanitized, turned into exam questions. But the core insights remained powerful. That modern life involves both liberation and imprisonment. That rationalization solves problems while creating new ones. That meaning and efficiency exist in tension. That charismatic moments disrupt but cannot sustain themselves, that all authority ultimately rests on belief. The 21st century brought new challenges that Weber's framework helps illuminate. The rise of populist leaders promising to overturn establishment politics looks like charismatic authority challenging rational legal systems. The growth of algorithmic management represents rationalization pushed to its logical extreme. The crisis of institutional legitimacy across Western democracies echoes Weber's analysis of how authority works. Technology companies created what some call surveillance capitalism, using data and algorithms to predict and shape behavior. This is rationalization applied to human consciousness itself, not just organizing production, but engineering desire. Weber warned about the iron cage of bureaucracy. He didn't imagine the algorithmic cage, but the logic is the same, making everything calculable, optimizing everything, leaving no space for the unmeasured. Religious movements rejecting modernity and seeking re-enchantment can be understood through Weber's lens. Their attempts to escape rationalization, to restore meaning in a disenchanted world. Whether Christian fundamentalism or Islamic revivalism or New Age spirituality, their responses to the same condition Weber diagnosed: the hunger for meaning in a world that has explained away all the old sources of meaning. Environmental movements warning about ecological collapse reflect Weber's rationalization thesis. The drive to dominate nature through calculation and control produces the climate crisis. Rationalization creates the very catastrophe it claimed to prevent. Weber would recognize this pattern. Efficiency pursued without regard for meaning or consequence generates its own destruction. Contemporary debates about artificial intelligence replay Weber's concerns. Machine learning systems optimize for narrow goals without understanding context or values. They're pure instrumental rationality. Tools that calculate means without questioning ends. The risk isn't that AI becomes conscious. It's that AI perfects rationalization, makes the iron cage inescapable by automating every decision, eliminating human judgment entirely. Weber's sociology remains relevant because he identified something fundamental about modernity, not just historical trends, but deep tensions between freedom and order, between meaning and efficiency, between spontaneity and predictability. These tensions don't resolve. They define modern existence. His personal tragedy mirrors his intellectual diagnosis. A life of rigorous scholarship and political engagement ended in mental collapse. The man who analysed rationalization couldn't escape it. The scholar who warned about disenchantment experienced it profoundly. His breakdown in 1898 wasn't just personal illness, it was rationalization turned inward. The same forces he studied consumed him. When Weber returned to work years later, he wrote with urgency, not just academic analysis, but moral warning. Modernity offers unprecedented material comfort and individual freedom, but it threatens something essential: the capacity for meaning, the space for values that transcend calculation, the possibility of living authentically rather than efficiently. This explains why his essays have such emotional power. They're not just descriptions, they're laments. The Protestant ethic ends with the iron cage image. Science as a vocation describes disenchantment with melancholy. Politics as a vocation insists on the ethical responsibility of those who wield power. Weber wrote like someone who knew what was being lost. His concept of value freedom in social science gets misunderstood. He didn't mean researchers should have no values. He meant they shouldn't let values distort their analysis of how the world works. Understand the causal mechanisms first, then make value judgments about whether those mechanisms are good or bad. Separate the is from the ought. This requires intellectual discipline. Researchers must bracket their preferences when studying social reality. describe what exists before prescribing what should exist. But Weber also insisted that value freedom has limits. You can't study something without choosing what to study. That choice reflects values. You can't interpret historical meaning without bringing your own framework. Complete objectivity is impossible. The best you can do is be transparent about your perspective. This creates a paradox. Social science requires value freedom to be legitimate, but value freedom is never complete. We're always embedded in our own historical moment, our own concerns, our own prejudices. Weber's solution was methodological self-awareness. Know your standpoint. Acknowledge its limitations. Try to see past it even though you never fully can. His methodology influenced generations of researchers. The idea that social science involves interpretation, not just observation, that understanding requires seeing things from the actor's perspective. That ideal types are analytical tools, not empirical descriptions. That comparative analysis reveals what's distinctive about particular cases. These principles became standard practice, but Weber's darker insights often get ignored. The textbook version presents him as the theorist of rationalization and bureaucracy. True enough, but sanitized. The full Weber is more disturbing. He saw modernity as a trap we built ourselves, a system that serves us while enslaving us, progress that diminishes what makes life worth living. His pessimism wasn't fashionable in the 20th century. The post-war consensus assumed problems could be solved through better administration, more education, more economic growth, more rational planning. Weber's warning that rationalization itself might be the problem seemed too dark, too fatalistic, easier to focus on his analysis of bureaucracy and ignore his critique of it. The 21st century makes Weber's pessimism more comprehensible. The solutions haven't worked as promised. Economic growth produces environmental crisis. Technology creates new forms of surveillance. Democracy faces legitimacy challenges. Rationalization continues, but meaning doesn't follow. We're more efficient and less fulfilled. Weber predicted this, not the specific details, but the general pattern. Modernity's contradictions intensify rather than resolve. Material abundance coexists with spiritual poverty. Individual freedom coexists with systemic constraint. Knowledge increases while certainty decreases. We know more and understand less. His concept of disenchantment captures something profound about modern consciousness. The world explained loses its magic. Mystery becomes problem to be solved. Wonder becomes ignorance to be eliminated. Everything must be calculable, predictable, controllable. The result is a world that makes sense but doesn't mean anything. Religious believers experience this as secularization. The sacred retreats. God becomes optional. Faith becomes private preference rather than shared reality. Traditional authorities lose their power to compel belief. This isn't necessarily bad, but it leaves a vacuum. What provides meaning when the old sources fail? Weber suggested that modern individuals must create their own values. No external authority can tell us how to live. We must choose for ourselves. This is both liberation and burden, freedom to define our own meaning, responsibility to do so without guidance from tradition or religion or any transcendent source. He called this the polytheism of values. Different gods compete. No way to prove which is correct. Science can't tell us whether beauty matters more than justice, whether loyalty matters more than honesty, whether individual freedom matters more than social solidarity. These are ultimate values. We must choose among them without rational justification. This creates existential anxiety. We're free but lost, autonomous but alone, responsible but without guidance. The disenchanted world offers no compass. Every direction seems equally arbitrary. We must commit to something knowing the commitment is groundless. Weber admired people who could make such commitments, who could choose their values and live by them despite the void. He called this ethical maturity, the ability to act decisively in an uncertain world, to take responsibility for your choices knowing they can't be fully justified, to maintain integrity when there's no foundation for integrity. His political writings emphasize this theme. Politics requires making decisions with incomplete information. Balancing competing values, accepting that every choice has costs. The ethics of responsibility means owning the consequences of your actions, not hiding behind principles or claiming you had no choice. He contrasted this with the ethics of conviction, acting on principle regardless of consequences, doing what's right and letting God handle the results. Weber respected this stance but considered it inadequate for politics. Political leaders must consider outcomes. They're responsible for what their decisions produce, not just their intentions. This distinction illuminates contemporary debates. Activists operating from ethics of conviction demand purity. No compromises, no pragmatic calculations, just righteous adherence to principle. Politicians operating from ethics of responsibility make deals. They accept imperfect solutions. They balance competing interests. Both approaches have value, both have limits. Weber's own political engagement reflected this tension. He wanted Germany to develop genuine democracy. He also thought most Germans weren't ready for it. He supported liberal reforms. He also defended strong executive power. He believed in individual freedom. He also thought national strength mattered. These positions seem contradictory. They reflect his understanding that politics involves tragic choices. His last years focused on comparative sociology. The massive project on the economic ethics of world religions attempted to understand why rational capitalism emerged in the West. Why not in China? Why not in India? What made European development distinctive? The Protestant ethic was just the beginning. Weber studied Confucianism, Hinduism, ancient Judaism, Buddhism, Islam. Each case revealed different paths of rationalization, different tensions between religious ethics and economic behavior, different resolutions of the problem of meaning. China had sophisticated bureaucracy and merchant culture, but Confucianism emphasized harmony with cosmic order rather than mastery of nature. India had complex philosophical traditions and extensive trade networks. But Hinduism's caste system and focus on transcendent reality limited economic dynamism. Only Protestant Christianity combined worldly asceticism with systematic methodical conduct in a way that generated rational capitalism. This wasn't about which religion was superior. It was about how different religious worldviews shaped economic behavior, how ultimate values influence material practices, how meaning and material life interact. Weber avoided crude materialism. Economics doesn't determine everything, but he also avoided crude idealism. Ideas don't float free of social conditions. His methodology involved Verstehen, understanding from within, grasping how people experience their own lives. What makes sense from their perspective? This requires imagination. You must enter another worldview, see its logic, understand why it compels belief, even if you don't share that belief. This approach influenced anthropology and interpretive sociology. The idea that cultures must be understood on their own terms, that imposing external categories distorts what you're studying, that meaning matters as much as behavior, that social science requires empathy, not just analysis. But Weber warned against relativism. Understanding different worldviews doesn't mean accepting all worldviews as equally valid. You can grasp why people believe things while still judging those beliefs. Empathy doesn't require approval. Interpretation doesn't prevent evaluation. His comparative work remained unfinished. He died before completing the massive synthesis he envisioned. The fragments were published posthumously. They show the scope of his ambition, a sociology of world civilizations, an account of how different cultures rationalized in different ways, a comprehensive theory of modernity's emergence. What survives are brilliant fragments, insights into Chinese social structure, analysis of Indian caste, studies of ancient Judaism. Each piece stands alone. Together they suggest a larger vision that was never fully realized. The unfinished quality mirrors Weber's view of modernity itself, a project without completion, a process without endpoint. His influence on later sociology was immense but complicated. Everyone read Weber. Few agreed on what he said. Parsons translated him into functionalism. Critical theorists emphasized his pessimism. Organizational theorists used his bureaucracy analysis. Interpretive sociologists followed his Verstehen methodology. Each group found something different. This reflects genuine ambiguity in Weber's work. He never resolved the tensions he identified, never offered solutions to the problems he diagnosed, never promised that modernity's contradictions could be overcome. His sociology describes dilemmas rather than solving them. Some found this unsatisfying. If rationalization is an iron cage, what's the point of studying it? If disenchantment can't be reversed, why lament it? If value conflicts can't be resolved, why analyze them? Weber's response would be that understanding matters even without solutions. Clarity about our condition is better than illusion. His concept of the ideal type became standard methodological tool, an analytical construct emphasizing certain features of reality while ignoring others, not meant to describe any actual case perfectly, meant to illuminate what makes cases similar or different, a measuring rod for comparison. The ideal type of bureaucracy doesn't describe any real organization completely. It highlights the rational legal logic that real bureaucracies approximate to varying degrees. By comparing actual cases to the ideal type, you see where they conform and where they deviate. This reveals patterns that pure empiricism misses. Critics argued this was arbitrary. Who decides which features to emphasize? Weber acknowledged the subjective element. Researchers choose what to highlight based on their interests, but not completely arbitrary. The ideal type must be logically consistent. It must help explain actual variation. It must generate insights that purely inductive methods don't. His political sociology influenced democratic theory. The analysis of legitimacy types became standard framework. Traditional authority based on custom, charismatic authority based on personal devotion, rational legal authority based on rules and procedures. Modern states rely primarily on the third type, but elements of the others persist. Political leaders cultivate charisma even in rational legal systems. Tradition influences policy even in democratic regimes. Pure types never exist. Reality always mixes elements. But the analytical distinction helps understand how authority works and why it sometimes fails. Weber died in Munich on June 14, 1920. Pneumonia following Spanish flu. He was 56 years old. His wife Marianne survived him by more than 3 decades. She edited his manuscripts, organized his papers, shaped his posthumous reputation. Without her work, much of Weber's thought would have been lost. The circumstances of his death reflected the chaos of post-war Germany. Revolution, counter-revolution, political violence, economic collapse. The world Weber had analysed was disintegrating. The rationalization he'd described was breaking down, or perhaps intensifying in darker forms. His legacy is disputed. Was he a liberal or a nationalist? An individualist or a collectivist? Optimist or pessimist? The answer is he was all of these. Weber contained contradictions. Like modernity itself, like the rationalization process, he devoted his life to understanding. The iron cage metaphor haunts modern consciousness, but Weber never used that phrase. The German term was Stahlhartes Gehäuse, steel-hard casing. Parsons translated it as iron cage in 1930. The image stuck, probably because it captures something Weber meant: modernity as prison, rationalization as trap, bureaucracy as bars. But Weber's view was more complex. The steel-hard casing wasn't entirely negative. It provided predictability, efficiency, protection from arbitrary power. The cage was also a shelter. This ambivalence runs through everything he wrote. He saw what was lost. He also saw what was gained. He mourned disenchantment. He appreciated rationalization's benefits. He feared bureaucracy. He recognized its necessity. This makes him difficult to claim for any political camp. Conservatives cite his warnings about rationalization. Progressives cite his analysis of domination. Liberals cite his defense of individual responsibility. Socialists cite his critique of capitalism. Everyone finds ammunition. No one gets the whole picture. His influence on 20th century thought extended far beyond sociology. Hannah Arendt read Weber. Her analysis of totalitarianism owes debt to his bureaucracy theory. The banality of evil reflects rationalization logic. Eichmann as bureaucrat, following procedures, maximizing efficiency, pursuing goals without questioning their value. This is Weber's nightmare made real. The Frankfurt School engaged Weber extensively. Marcuse, Adorno, Horkheimer. They saw rationalization as domination, instrumental reason as oppression. The dialectic of enlightenment echoed Weber's disenchantment. Reason turned against itself, calculation replacing meaning, system absorbing life world. Their critique was more Marxist than Weber's, but the Weberian framework shaped it. Jürgen Habermas tried synthesizing Marx and Weber. His theory of communicative action distinguished instrumental rationality from communicative rationality. The former dominates systems like economy and state. The latter operates in life world of everyday interaction. Modernity's pathology is colonization, system logic invading life world, bureaucratic and economic rationality displacing communicative reason. The solution is protecting spaces where people coordinate action through mutual understanding rather than strategic calculation. This is more optimistic than Weber. Habermas believes modernity's potential hasn't been exhausted. Rationalization contains emancipatory possibilities. The problem is imbalance, not rationalization itself. Weber would have been skeptical. He saw no mechanism preventing system expansion. No guarantee communicative spaces would survive. Michel Foucault's analysis of power echoes Weber without acknowledging it. Foucault described how modern institutions discipline subjects through surveillance and normalization. Schools, hospitals, prisons, factories, all create docile bodies through rational techniques. This is rationalization, as Weber conceived it. But Foucault emphasized power's productive aspects. It doesn't just repress, it creates subjects, constitutes identities, generates knowledge. Weber would have recognized this. His analysis of discipline anticipated Foucault's microphysics of power. Pierre Bourdieu's sociology used Weberian concepts while claiming Marxist affiliation. Symbolic domination, cultural capital, distinction. These analyze how power operates through status rather than force, how social hierarchies reproduce through taste and lifestyle, how economic classes become status groups. This is Weber's stratification theory applied to post-war France. Bourdieu made it empirical, tested it quantitatively, but the conceptual framework came from Weber. In organizational theory, Weber became unavoidable. His bureaucracy model shaped management science. Taylorism applied Weberian rationalization to factory floor. Scientific management, time motion studies, standardized procedures, breaking complex tasks into simple routines. This increased efficiency. It also de-skilled workers, turned people into cogs. Weber predicted this. The human relations school reacted against Weberian rationalization. Elton Mayo's Hawthorne studies showed informal organization mattered. Workers weren't just following rules, they created social networks, developed group norms, responded to attention and recognition. Management needed to account for human factors, not just formal structure. This critique assumed Weber ignored informal dynamics. That's not quite fair. He knew formal rules never tell full story, but his ideal type emphasized formal structure. That was its purpose. Post-war management theory oscillated between embracing and rejecting bureaucracy. Contingency theorists argued bureaucracy works for stable environments, not for changing ones. In stable contexts, routinization increases efficiency. In turbulent contexts, flexibility matters more. This refined Weber without rejecting him, showed bureaucracy's scope conditions, when rational legal authority works best. In political science, Weber's influence was equally profound. Robert Michaels extended his analysis in political parties. The iron law of oligarchy stated all organizations become oligarchic, even democratic ones. Leadership concentrates power, members become passive, bureaucracy dominates. This was Weberian logic applied to social movements. Weber influenced the conclusion, but might have questioned the determinism. He saw tendencies, not iron laws. Joseph Schumpeter's economic sociology built on Weber, capitalism as creative destruction, entrepreneurship as innovation, routinization as economic stagnation. These themes echo Weber's analysis. Schumpeter made entrepreneurship more central. Weber emphasized bureaucratization more. But both saw capitalism's dynamism and its tendency toward rationalization. In the sociology of religion, Weber's comparative studies remained foundational. Clifford Geertz's interpretive anthropology followed Weberian Verstehen, understanding meaning from inside cultures, religion as symbolic system, not just social glue or ideological mask, but framework giving life meaning. This is Weber's approach applied to 20th century ethnography. Robert Beller's civil religion thesis extended Weberian analysis to American culture. Political rituals as sacred, national symbols as religious, public ceremonies as collective worship. This shows how secular societies maintain integration through quasi-religious practices. Weber would have recognized this. He knew rationalization never completely eliminates sacred, just transforms it. The secularization debate engaged Weber's disenchantment thesis. Did modernity necessarily undermine religion? Peter Berger initially said yes, later said no. Religion adapted rather than disappearing. Rational legal authority didn't eliminate charismatic or traditional elements. They persisted in modified forms. This challenged crude secularization theory, but confirmed Weber's view that modernization is uneven. Different spheres rationalize at different rates. In the sociology of knowledge, Karl Mannheim developed Weber's insights about value relativity. Ideology and Utopia explored how social position shapes thought. Different classes generate different worldviews. Knowledge isn't neutral, it's situated. This was Weberian epistemology radicalized. Mannheim went further than Weber in relativizing truth claims. Weber maintained firmer distinction between fact and value, but both saw knowledge as socially conditioned. Weber's methodology influenced philosophy of social science. Karl Hempel's covering law model tried formalizing social explanation. This was anti-Weberian. Hempel wanted laws like natural science. Weber insisted social science is different. Verstehen requires interpretation, not just causal laws. The debate between explanation and understanding, between nomothetic and ideographic approaches, between positivism and interpretivism, echoes Weber's methodological writings. Charles Taylor's interpretive social science followed Weberian tradition. Understanding human beings requires grasping meanings, not just observing behaviour. This challenges behaviourism and rational choice theory. Both treat people as black boxes, observe inputs and outputs, ignore internal meanings. Weber showed this misses what makes human action different from natural events, meaning matters. In economic sociology, Mark Granovetter revived Weberian themes. His embeddedness argument challenged neoclassical economics. Economic action isn't separate from social relations. It's embedded in networks, trust, norms, relationships. These shape market behaviour. This is Weber's point that economic action is social action, not purely instrumental calculation. Rational choice theory claimed Weberian heritage. James Coleman argued Weber's ideal types were rational actor models. Methodological individualism, explaining social phenomena through individual choices. This interpretation is contested. Weber emphasized meaning, not just calculation. Verstehen isn't cost-benefit analysis, but rational choice theorists found resources in Weber's emphasis on purposive action. The new institutionalism in organizational theory rediscovered Weber. John Meyer and Brian Rowan showed organizations adopt structures for legitimacy, not just efficiency. Formal rules signal conformity to institutional norms. This explains why organizations look similar even when environments differ. Isomorphism reflects rationalization as cultural process, not just technical optimization. In historical sociology, Theda Skocpol and others used Weberian comparative method, analyzing few cases in depth, identifying causal patterns, avoiding both pure ideography and covering laws. This middle ground Weber advocated became standard approach, comparative historical analysis as distinct methodology. Barrington Moore's social origins of dictatorship and democracy followed Weberian logic. Different paths to modernity, different class coalitions, different political outcomes. Bourgeois revolution leads to democracy. Revolution from above leads to fascism. Peasant revolution leads to communism. These ideal types illuminate historical variation. This is Weber's method applied to 20th century politics. Charles Tilley's historical sociology used Weberian concepts while claiming different theoretical allegiance. State formation as rationalization, monopoly of violence, standardization of administration, penetration of society. These are Weberian themes. Tilley made them more concrete, traced actual processes, showed mechanisms, but the framework came from Weber. Feminist scholars engaged Weber critically. His analysis of domination ignored gender. Patriarchy wasn't separate domination type. It was naturalized, invisible. Weber's blindness here reflected his time, but some feminist theorists found resources in his work. The distinction between formal and substantive rationality helped analyze gendered organizations. Bureaucracy claims neutrality, actually embeds masculine norms. This is Weberian critique applied to gender. Post-colonial theory challenged Weber's Eurocentrism. His comparative sociology privileged Western rationalization, treated other civilizations as lacking, India as tradition-bound, China as stagnant, Islam as warrior ethic. This Orientalism distorted reality, ignored indigenous rationalities, assumed single path to modernity. Edward Said's critique applies to Weber, but some post-colonial scholars used Weberian concepts. Partha Chatterjee analysed colonial state using bureaucracy theory, showed how rational legal authority operated differently in colonies. In science studies, Weber influenced understanding of scientific rationality. Thomas Kuhn's paradigm concept echoed Weberian ideal types. Normal science as rationalized practice, following established procedures, puzzle solving within framework, revolutionary science as paradigm shift. This isn't pure accumulation. its transformation of worldview. Weber would have recognized this. Scientific rationalization creates new frameworks, doesn't discover timeless truths. Bruno Latour's actor network theory challenged Weberian rationalization story. Science doesn't progressively disenchant world, it creates new enchantments. Laboratory practices produce facts through material arrangements. Rationality is achievement, not foundation. This is more radical than Weber, but it shares his attention to how rationalization actually works, not just its results. In legal theory, Weber's sociology of law remained influential. The distinction between formal and substantive rationality illuminated modern legal systems. Common law versus civil law, precedent versus code, case-by-case judgment versus systematic rules. These differences reflect rationalization's multiple paths, not single trajectory. Critical legal studies used Weber to challenge legal formalism. Law claims autonomy, actually reflects power. Rules claim neutrality, actually embed interests. This is Weberian insight radicalized. Weber saw law's formal rationality. Critical theorists emphasized its substantive biases. Both recognized gap between law's self-presentation and its operation. In cultural sociology, Weber's influence persisted through multiple generations. The focus on meaning, the analysis of value spheres, the attention to symbols and interpretations, these became standard approaches. Jeffrey Alexander's strong program in cultural sociology explicitly drew on Weber. Culture as autonomous, not epiphenomenal, shaping action through meaningful frameworks. Anne Sweidler's culture as toolkit concept refined Weberian insights. Culture provides repertoires, not determining values. People draw on available meanings strategically. This is less deterministic than crude culture explanations. Closer to Weber's emphasis on elective affinity, cultural elements and material interests align. Neither determines the other. In the sociology of capitalism, Weber's spirit argument generated endless debate. Did Protestant ethic cause capitalism, or just correlate? Did ascetic values create accumulation drive, or did capitalism create values justifying itself? These questions miss Weber's point. He wasn't claiming monocausal explanation. He was showing meaningful connection. How religious ideas made capitalism thinkable, legitimate, possible. Immanuel Wallerstein's world systems theory challenged Weber while using his concepts. Capitalism as global system, not national economies, core exploiting periphery. But Wallerstein retained Weberian emphasis on rationalization. Modern world system rationalizes production, standardizes exchange, bureaucratizes administration. This is rationalization at planetary scale. Weber never imagined this. His analysis remained nation-state focused, but the logic extends. Globalization is rationalization transcending borders. Transnational corporations as bureaucracies, international organizations as rational legal authority, financial markets as calculated exchange, the iron cage gone global. In organizational theory, Weber's bureaucracy model faced practical challenges. Real organizations deviated systematically. Informal structures emerged. Personal relationships mattered. Rules got bent, goals displaced. But these deviations proved Weber's point. Organizations rationalize. Then rationalization creates new problems. Informal networks compensate for rigid rules. Personal ties humanize impersonal systems. Goal displacement shows rationalization's limits. Herbert Simon's bounded rationality refined Weberian insights. Organizations don't maximize, they satisfy. Decisions aren't fully rational. They're constrained by information limits, cognitive capacity, time pressure. This is rationalization acknowledging its bounds, trying to be rational within constraints, not achieving perfect rationality. Weber would have understood this. His ideal types weren't claims about reality. They were analytical tools for understanding it. In environmental sociology, Weber's rationalization thesis explained ecological crisis. Instrumental reason treats nature as resource, calculable, exploitable, controllable. Disenchantment removes nature's sacred status. No inherent value, only use value. This enables extraction without limits, calculation without consequences beyond profit. John Bellamy Foster's metabolic rift concept combined Marx and Weber. Capitalism rationalizes nature, disrupts ecological cycles, creates unsustainable extraction. The iron cage becomes environmental trap. Rationalized systems can't respond to ecological limits. They're designed for endless growth, instrumental calculation, short-term profit. This is rationalization destroying its own conditions. Weber didn't foresee this, but his framework explains it. In the sociology of technology, Weber influenced understanding of technical rationalization. Langdon Winner argued technologies have politics. They embody values, reflect choices, create social orders. This is Weberian insight applied to artifacts. Technologies rationalize social relations, make certain actions possible, others impossible, some efficient, others difficult. The automobile rationalized transportation, created suburban sprawl, required highway systems, restructured cities. This wasn't inevitable. It was rationalization following particular path. Other technologies would have created different social forms: bicycle cities, train networks, walking communities. Technology studies, after Weber emphasized path dependency. Early choices constrain later options. Standards lock in. Infrastructures persist. This is rationalization's momentum. Once systems rationalize in particular direction, changing course becomes difficult. Invested capital, trained personnel, established procedures, existing infrastructure, all resist change. The iron cage rebuilt in steel and concrete. In the sociology of consumption, Weber's status analysis remained relevant. Consumption signals position, creates distinction, maintains boundaries. This isn't just economic, it's meaningful. Thorstein Veblen's conspicuous consumption concept paralleled Weber's status analysis, displaying wealth, demonstrating position, leisure class, separating from working class. Pierre Bourdieu systematized this Weberian insight: distinction through taste, cultural capital, habitus. These are rationalized status claims, not traditional honors, achieved through calculated displays, educational credentials, cultural knowledge, aesthetic preferences. This is status competition rationalized, made systematic, measurable. Colin Campbell's romantic ethic argument extended Weber. Modern consumption isn't just aesthetic accumulation, it's imaginative hedonism, seeking novel experiences, pursuing fantasies. This seems opposite to Weber's Protestant ethic, but it's another rationalization form: calculated pleasure, planned spontaneity, rationalized emotion, the iron cage with entertainment system. In historical sociology, Weber's comparative method inspired multiple research programs. Bringing history back in, comparing cases systematically, identifying causal patterns. Vida Skocpol's states and social revolutions followed Weberian logic. Compare France, Russia, China. Identify common patterns. Explain revolutionary outcomes. State structures matter. International pressures matter. Class coalitions matter. This is Weberian multi-causal analysis, not single-factor determinism. Charles Tilly's coercion and capital framework combined Weber and Marx, state-making as rationalization, monopolizing violence, extracting resources, creating bureaucracies, but also shaped by capitalism. Resource availability, class structures, economic development. This synthesis advanced beyond Weber, showed how rationalization and capitalism intertwined in state formation. In the sociology of religion today, Weber's framework remains indispensable. Secularization debates still reference his disenchantment thesis. Did rationalization undermine religion? Evidence is mixed. Western Europe secularized, United States remained religious. Elsewhere, religion revived. Pentecostalism exploded globally. Islamic movements gained strength. Buddhism adapted to modernity. These patterns complicate simple secularization story. Jose Casanova distinguished secularization dimensions: institutional differentiation, religious belief decline, religion's privatization. These vary independently. Societies can rationalize institutions while maintaining religious belief. Separate church and state while remaining devout. This is more nuanced than Weber's original thesis, but it uses his concepts: rationalization, differentiation, value spheres. The framework proves flexible. Religious economies theory applied Weberian concepts unexpectedly, treating religion as rational choice. Individuals calculate costs and benefits, choose religious commitments strategically. This seems opposite to Weber's meaning emphasis, but it's rationalization applied to religion itself, making religious behavior calculable, predictable, subject to economic analysis. The irony is perfect. Rationalization reaches religion, makes even faith rational. Critics rightly challenge this. Religion isn't just calculation, it's meaning, community, transcendence. But the debate itself is Weberian, arguing about rationalization's limits, where calculation applies, where meaning matters. These are Weber's questions. In political sociology, Weber's authority type structured analysis of legitimacy. Why do people obey? Not just force, not only interest, also belief in legitimacy. This insight remains fundamental. Traditional authority in monarchies, charismatic authority in revolutionary movements, rational legal authority in democracies. These ideal types illuminate real politics. Michael Mann's Sources of Social Power framework extended Weber. Ideological power, economic power, military power, political power. These aren't reducible to each other. They intersect, combine, create historical outcomes. This is more complex than Weber's typology, but methodologically similar, identifying power forms, analyzing their interaction, explaining historical change through multiple factors. In the sociology of social movements, Weber influenced understanding of charisma's routinization. Revolutionary movements face dilemma. Initial enthusiasm fades. Charismatic leaders die. Followers need organization. So movements bureaucratize, create rules, establish procedures. Hierarchy emerges. This transforms movements, original vision compromised, spontaneity lost. But organization enables survival. Weber saw this in early Christianity: charismatic prophet, apostolic community, then church hierarchy, doctrinal standardization, institutional survival. Robert Michael's iron law of oligarchy applied this to socialist parties. Democratic movements create leadership. Leaders consolidate power. Oligarchy emerges. This isn't betrayal, it's rationalization. Organizations require coordination. Coordination requires hierarchy. Hierarchy concentrates power. The iron cage built by Democrats. In urban sociology, Weber's work on the city influenced subsequent research. What makes cities distinctive? Concentration, diversity, impersonal relations, economic specialization, political autonomy. These create particular social forms. Louis Wirth's urbanism as a way of life elaborated Weberian themes. Cities rationalize social relations. Interactions become specialized, segmented, calculating. Primary groups weaken. Secondary associations multiply. This is rationalization in spatial form. Jane Jacobs challenged this. Cities aren't just rational systems, they're living communities. Neighbourhoods have character. Streets have life. Order emerges from complexity, not imposed by planning. This critique questioned rationalization's inevitability, showed alternatives: organic order, spontaneous coordination, non-bureaucratic community. But even Jacob's critique engaged Weber's framework, arguing about rationalization's effects, its limits, its alternatives. In economic sociology, new institutionalism drew heavily on Weber. Organizations adopt practices not just for efficiency, for legitimacy. They mimic successful organizations, follow professional norms, conform to regulatory requirements. This is rationalization as social process, not technical optimization. Paul DiMaggio and Walter Powell identified isomorphic pressures: coercive isomorphism, mimetic isomorphism, normative isomorphism. Organizations become similar, not because one best way, because conformity brings legitimacy. This refined Weber's rationalization thesis, showed its social construction. Neil Fligstein's markets as politics approach extended this. Markets aren't natural. They're constructed through laws, norms, organizational forms, power struggles. This is rationalization as contested process. Different groups promote different rationalities. Winner's rationality becomes taken for granted, seems natural, inevitable, but it's contingent, historical, reversible. In cultural theory, Weber's value spheres concept influenced debates about modernity. Jürgen Habermas distinguished system and life world. System rationalizes economy, state, bureaucracy. Life world provides meaning, culture, solidarity, identity. Modern societies face crisis when system colonizes life world. Instrumental reason invades meaning domains. This is Weber's rationalization conflict updated: economy versus religion, politics versus family, calculation versus meaning. Habermas sought resolution through communicative action, rational discourse, mutual understanding, undistorted communication. This is rationalization redeemed, made compatible with meaning. Weber was more pessimistic. He saw spheres as irreconcilable, gods warring eternally. In globalization studies, Weber's framework explained transnational rationalization, international standards, global regulations, transnational professions. These rationalize across borders, create worldwide similarities. John Mayer's world society theory pushed this far. Global culture shapes national institutions. Education systems converge. Human rights spread. Environmental regulations standardize. This isn't imperialism exactly. It's rationalization transcending nations, creating global norms, worldwide expectations, shared models. Critics noted power behind this: Western dominance, Northern hegemony, rich countries imposing standards. This is accurate, but it's still rationalization. Power operates through rational legal forms, international organizations, professional networks, scientific authority. The iron cage speaks English, wears business suit, carries spreadsheet. In the sociology of professions, Weber's analysis remained central. Professions claim expertise, monopolize knowledge, control markets. They rationalize through credentials, licensing, ethical codes, professional associations. This creates social closure, excludes outsiders, protects insiders. Elliot Friedson emphasized professions' autonomy, self-regulation, peer control, professional judgment. This distinguishes professions from bureaucracies. Professionals resist routinization, claim discretion, invoke expertise, but they still rationalize, create standards, formalize training, systematize knowledge. Andrew Abbott showed professional competition, jurisdictional struggles. Different professions claim same problems: medicine versus psychology, lawyers versus accountants, engineers versus architects. Winners rationalize their jurisdiction, Make it seem natural, necessary, permanent. This is ongoing rationalization, never complete, always contested. In science and technology studies, Weber influenced understanding of scientific rationalization. Laboratory studies showed how facts get made. Bruno Latour and Steve Woolgar demonstrated scientific practices' social construction. But this isn't relativism, it's understanding rationalization's mechanisms. Scientists don't discover facts, they produce them. Through instruments, procedures, peer review, publication. This is rationalization making knowledge, standardizing methods, creating reproducibility, establishing authority. Ian Hacking distinguished representing and intervening. Scientists don't just theorize, they manipulate, experiment, create effects. This is rationalization as practice, not just thought. Making nature calculable through intervention. Weber anticipated this. Science as vocation, specialized, technicalized, producing knowledge through method. Weber's pessimism about rationalization's future proved prescient. The iron cage tightened. Bureaucracies expanded. Markets penetrated new domains. Calculation displaced meaning. Yet his pessimism wasn't total. He saw tension, conflict, resistance, value spheres still clash. Religious revival challenges secularization. Charismatic movements disrupt routines. Meaning-seeking resists pure instrumentalism. The warring gods haven't surrendered. They've adapted, found new forms, created hybrid rationalities. This is Weber's lasting insight. Rationalization isn't smooth, inevitable, unopposed. It's contested, produces contradictions, generates resistance. Each rationalization creates new tensions. Bureaucracy breeds informal networks. Markets produce solidarity movements. Calculation sparks meaning-seeking. The process continues. No final synthesis, no ultimate resolution. Just ongoing struggle between incompatible values in increasingly rationalized forms. Weber died believing his questions unanswerable. What should we do? Which God should we serve? He offered no resolution, only clarity about the choice. This refusal to prescribe remains his greatest contribution. He analyzed rationalization without endorsing it, described disenchantment without celebrating it, explained bureaucracy without recommending it. He gave us tools for understanding our world, not blueprints for changing it. The choice remains ours. Between competing values, incompatible goods, warring gods, Weber's framework helps us see the stakes, understand the costs, recognize what we sacrifice with each choice. But it doesn't make choosing easier. Perhaps that's appropriate. Some questions have no solutions, only perpetual negotiation, ongoing struggle, endless interpretation. Weber understood this, made peace with it, demanded we face it honestly. That honesty is his gift. The long shadow Weber cast continues darkening our rationalized world, making us question what we've gained, mourn what we've lost, wonder where we're going. These are still his questions. We're still seeking answers. Max Weber died in Munich in June 1920, but the work was never meant to be finished. That's not a flaw, it's the point. He spent his life analysing tensions that don't resolve, questions that have no final answers, systems that generate their own contradictions. The rationalised world he described has only intensified. Algorithms now do what bureaucrats once did. Optimization reaches into consciousness itself. The iron cage has gone digital. We carry it in our pockets, check it compulsively, let it structure our attention. This would have fascinated and horrified Weber in equal measure. His framework still works because the problems persist. We're still caught between efficiency and meaning, still navigating value conflicts that can't be reconciled, still building cages we can't escape while pretending they're liberating. The disenchanted world offers more knowledge and less wisdom, more calculation and less understanding, more data and less meaning. Weber never promised solutions. He promised clarity. Clarity about what modernity costs, what rationalization achieves and destroys, what we sacrifice when we choose one value over another. That clarity matters more now than when he wrote. We've forgotten what was lost. We've naturalized what was constructed. We've accepted as inevitable what was contingent. His comparative method showed multiple paths. Different cultures rationalized differently, created different tensions, faced different contradictions. This matters because it means alternatives exist. Not easy alternatives, not perfect alternatives, but alternatives. The single story of Western rationalization obscures other possibilities, other ways of organizing life, other balances between calculation and meaning. The charismatic disruptions keep coming. Leaders promising to overturn systems, movements claiming to restore lost meanings. These aren't aberrations. They're responses to rationalization's costs. When systems become too rigid, too impersonal, too meaningless, charisma erupts, sometimes productively, sometimes catastrophically. Weber saw this pattern, warned about it, knew it would repeat. His emphasis on legitimacy explains our current crisis. Systems work when people believe in them. When belief fails, even the most powerful structures collapse. We're watching legitimacy erode across institutions, not because conspiracy, not because failure of function, because rationalization reached its limits, because efficiency without meaning satisfies nobody, because calculation without value leaves people empty. The value pluralism he insisted on contradicts our yearning for unity. We want one right answer, one correct path, one supreme value. Weber said no. Multiple values compete, all legitimate within their spheres, none reducible to others. This creates permanent tension, permanent choice, permanent responsibility. We must choose knowing the choice is groundless. Act knowing we can't fully justify the action. Commit knowing commitment is arbitrary. This is not comfortable. It's not meant to be. Comfort comes from certainty. Weber offered none, just tools for thinking clearly about impossible choices, frameworks for understanding what we're actually doing when we rationalize, when we bureaucratize, when we calculate, when we disenchant. His personal story mirrors his intellectual vision, breakdown and recovery, collapse and reconstruction. The driven scholar who couldn't sustain the drive, the rationalist who experienced irrationality's power, the man who analyzed meaning's loss while mourning it himself. He lived the contradictions he described. That's why the work carries such weight. It's not detached analysis, it's diagnosis from inside the condition. The Protestant ethic thesis started everything, but it's his theory of rationalization that endures, the comprehensive vision of modernity as process without endpoint, creating systems that serve us while constraining us, solving problems while generating new ones, liberating us from tradition while imprisoning us in bureaucracy. This dialectic continues. Each generation faces it anew. Weber's students scattered across disciplines, created schools, founded traditions, fought over his legacy, but nobody captured everything. Each took pieces, emphasized different aspects, found different resources. The work is too rich, too contradictory, too honest about tensions. It resists simple appropriation. He would have appreciated this. He didn't want disciples repeating doctrine. He wanted thinkers confronting reality, using his concepts as tools, not worshipping them as truth. Ideal types aren't reality. They're devices for seeing reality more clearly. When they stop helping, discard them. Build new ones. The comparative religion studies remain underappreciated. Everyone knows Protestant ethic. Few read the China study. Fewer still the India analysis. But this is where his method shines, taking cultures seriously on their own terms. understanding their internal logic, then comparing, showing how different rationalities emerged, different solutions to universal problems, different paths that didn't lead to Western capitalism. This matters because it denies inevitability, shows contingency, opens possibilities. His political writings were occasional, responses to crises, but they contain permanent insights. Politics requires getting hands dirty, choosing between goods, accepting consequences. No ethical purity possible, just responsibility for what actually happens. This realism offends moralists. They want principles without compromise. Weber said, "That's not politics, that's preaching." Politics requires the ethic of responsibility, calculating outcomes, owning results, living with tragedy. The warring gods metaphor captures something profound. We want harmony, want values aligned, want one choice that satisfies everything. Weber said no. Values conflict fundamentally. Beauty and justice pull different directions. Freedom and equality create tensions. Individual autonomy and collective solidarity can't both be maximized. Choose, then accept the cost. This is existentially demanding. We're free but lost. Autonomous but without guidance. Responsible but without foundation. Modernity's burden is choosing our values knowing they're groundless, then living by them anyway, then accepting responsibility for the choice. This is maturity. This is honesty. This is what Weber demanded of himself and his readers. The iron cage image persists because it names something real. Systems we built now constrain us. Rules meant to serve us now govern us. Procedures created for efficiency now impede adaptation. This isn't conspiracy, it's rationalization's logic. Once systems exist, they develop momentum, create constituencies, establish procedures, resist change. The cage locks from inside. But Weber saw more than the cage. He saw tension, resistance, conflict, value spheres fighting back, religion challenging economic rationality, art rejecting instrumental calculation, politics asserting collective meaning against market logic. These battles continue. Sometimes religion loses, sometimes it adapts, sometimes it transforms. Nothing's settled, everything's contested. His sociology of domination explained power without reducing it. Force alone doesn't sustain rule. Rulers need legitimacy. People must believe in the right to command. This belief comes from multiple sources: tradition, charisma, legality. Modern states rely primarily on rational legal authority, but traditional and charismatic elements persist. Leaders cultivate personal magnetism. Nations invoke historic missions. Pure rational legal authority is unstable. It needs supplementation. This explains why democracies struggle. Rational legal authority works when procedures are trusted. When trust erodes, procedures aren't enough. People want meaning, want leaders who embody values, want politics that transcends calculation. When rational legal systems fail to provide this, charismatic alternatives emerge. Sometimes democratic, sometimes authoritarian, always promising to restore what rationalization destroyed. Weber's blindness to gender and colonialism limits his analysis. He naturalized male domination, ignored empire's role in European development, treated non-Western societies as lacking rather than different. These aren't minor flaws, they're structural limitations reflecting his time and position. Later scholars corrected them, used his methods against his conclusions, showed how rationalization embeds power, how formal equality masks substantive domination, how Western rationality was imperial project. This is proper intellectual legacy, not reverence, critical engagement, taking concepts seriously enough to test them, push them, revise them. Weber would approve. He knew his work was partial, knew it reflected his standpoint, knew it would be superseded. The point was starting conversations, not ending them. His breakdown in 1898 reshaped everything. 7 years unable to work, unable to think, unable to function. This wasn't just illness. It was rationalization turned inward. The driven productivity, the compulsive achievement, the relentless calculation, all collapsing under their own weight. The man who analysed the iron cage experienced it personally, completely, devastatingly. Recovery brought different thinking, less systematic, more fragmentary, more attuned to meaning's importance, more aware of rationalization's costs. The post-breakdown Weber wrote with urgency, with passion, with recognition that rationalization destroys something irreplaceable. This gives the work its power. It's not detached scholarship, it's warning from someone who knows the price. The charisma concept remains controversial. Critics say it legitimizes authoritarian leadership, makes dictatorship seem natural. This misreads Weber. He wasn't endorsing charisma, he was analyzing it, showing how it works, when it emerges, why it appeals, how it routinizes. Understanding doesn't mean approval. Weber feared charismatic demagogues, warned against them, but he knew they'd keep appearing, especially in rationalized societies that destroy meaning. His influence on organizational theory created irony. Business schools teaching Weber to make bureaucracy more efficient, using his analysis of the iron cage to strengthen the cage. He would have found this darkly amusing, his critique weaponized, his warnings ignored, his framework deployed against his intentions. But that's how ideas work. Once released, they escape control, get used in ways never intended, serve purposes never imagined. The distinction between formal and substantive rationality illuminates contemporary politics. Formal rationality means following consistent procedures. Substantive rationality means achieving particular values. These conflict. Legal systems can be formally rational, following rules consistently, while substantively irrational, producing unjust outcomes. Markets can be formally rational, allocating efficiently, while substantively irrational, destroying communities. This distinction cuts through confused debates, shows why technical solutions fail moral problems, why efficiency doesn't guarantee justice. Weber's methodology influenced everyone who came after, whether they knew it or not. The emphasis on meaning, the comparative approach, the ideal type construction, the distinction between fact and value, the Verstehen requirement. These became standard, not always acknowledged, not always followed, but present as background assumptions shaping how social science works. His final years were productive beyond measure, writing constantly, teaching occasionally, warning urgently. The Weimar Republic was failing. He saw it clearly. Democracy without legitimacy, rationality without meaning, order without authority. The conditions for catastrophe were assembling. He died before the worst came. Perhaps fortunately, he wouldn't have survived what followed. Not physically, not psychologically. Marianne preserved his legacy, edited papers, published manuscripts, shaped reception. Without her, much would be lost. Their unusual marriage enabled his work, created space for thinking, provided stability despite absence of conventional intimacy. This arrangement was unconventional, but it functioned. Both pursued their projects. Both contributed to intellectual life. Both lived according to chosen values. However strange the choice seemed to others, the Protestant ethic debate continues. Will probably continue forever. Did Calvinist theology cause capitalism, or just correlate? Did ideas shape economics, or economics shape ideas? These questions miss the point. Weber showed elective affinity, how cultural and material factors aligned, how meanings and interests reinforced each other. Not simple causation, complex interaction, multiple factors producing contingent outcome. His comparative religion studies deserve more attention. They show the method fully deployed, taking cultures seriously, understanding internal logics, then comparing, showing how different paths emerged, how different solutions to meaning problems created different social structures, how different rationalizations produced different tensions. This is sophisticated historical sociology, not crude determinism, not simple typology, careful analysis of specific cases revealing general patterns. The disenchantment thesis names something everyone feels: loss of magic, loss of mystery, loss of meaning. The world explained becomes world flattened. Everything calculable becomes nothing sacred. This isn't nostalgia exactly. We can't return to enchantment. Knowledge can't be unknown. Science can't be unlearned. But we can recognize the cost, mourn what's lost. Question whether calculation exhausts reality. Weber wrote from inside modernity, not as outsider critic, not as traditional defender, but as someone who knew rationalization intimately, participated in it, contributed to it, suffered from it. This position gave him clarity. He wasn't romanticizing pre-modern life, wasn't proposing return to tradition, just analyzing what modernity costs, what it achieves, what contradictions it generates. The value-freedom doctrine gets misunderstood. He didn't say values don't matter. He said keep them separate from analysis. Understand how things work before judging whether they're good. This is methodological discipline, not moral abdication. You can passionately believe in justice while dispassionately analyzing power. You can fight for values while honestly examining how values work socially. His political engagement showed this balance. Weber had strong commitments, defended democracy, opposed authoritarianism, fought for liberal reforms, but he analysed politics without illusion, saw democracy's weaknesses, recognised liberalism's contradictions, understood that good intentions produce bad outcomes. This realism made him effective, also made him uncomfortable to allies. He wouldn't pretend problems were simple, wouldn't promise easy solutions. The comparative method he pioneered remains essential. You understand societies by comparing them, not by studying one in isolation, not by applying universal theories, but by careful comparison, revealing what's distinctive, what's general, how different factors combine producing different outcomes. This requires immense knowledge, multiple languages, diverse sources, historical depth. Weber had all this. Few since have matched it. His writing style was dense, German academic prose at its most demanding. This limited accessibility, but reflected the complexity he was analysing. Simple prose can't capture rationalization's contradictions, can't hold multiple tensions simultaneously, can't think through multi-directional causation. The difficulty was necessary, not accidental, not fixable through better editing. The legacy is contested because the work is contradictory. Weber contained multitudes, liberal and nationalist, individualist and communitarian, rationalist and mystic, optimist and pessimist, all simultaneously, all without resolution. This makes him hard to claim, hard to appropriate, hard to simplify, but it makes him honest. Reality is contradictory. Thought that captures reality must be too. He stands at modernity's hinge point, looking backward to traditional world, looking forward to rationalized future, understanding both, mourning what's lost, recognizing what's gained, refusing to choose sides cleanly. This position gave him insight, made him see what others missed, made his analysis endure when simpler views aged poorly. The iron cage tightens, but it's still contested. That's Weber's final lesson. Rationalization advances, but never completely. Never without resistance, never without contradiction. The warring gods still fight. Meaning still challenges calculation. Charisma still disrupts routine. Substantive values still contest formal procedures. The struggle continues. Weber gave us tools for understanding it, not for ending it, because it can't end. Because the contradictions are permanent. Because modernity is tension, not resolution, not synthesis, not progress toward harmony, just ongoing conflict between incompatible goods in increasingly rationalized forms. That's where we are. That's where we'll remain. Weber saw it clearly, made us see it too. That clarity is enough, has to be enough, because nothing else is possible. The questions remain. The answers don't come. We choose anyway. Take responsibility. Live with consequences. That's Weber's demand. That's modernity's burden. That's our inheritance from the man who analysed the cage from inside it, then refused to promise escape.